Welcome to the Sutherland Report. Thank you so much for joining me once again. It's always a privilege to have your company. I don't apologize for this little advert, but please, if you don't have a copy of this book, The American Gulag Chronicles, then please buy one to support the J6 prisoners in America that have been residing in gulags in America. And just as a comment, please, dear American friends, pay close attention to what is happening over here in regard to the UK politically and events that are unfolding. We need your prayers. I'm going to bring on my dear friend Peter Baum, and we are going to have an update on Israel and discuss various things that are going on. Peter, good to see you, my friend, as always, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure, Mark. Always good to see you, and especially you looking so well.
Thank you very much indeed. Peter, thank you for all that you're writing in Blitz. If you could give a quick plug, tell everyone where they can find your work. You've been writing some amazing stuff, and I do apologize for not emailing you and saying excellent, because it is excellent, and thank you for all your research and information. So could you please tell everyone straight off the bat where they can find you?
Yeah, they can find me on Twitter, where my following, fortunately, is on an upward trajectory. And my Twitter handle is @BAUM_P in small letters. And Blitz, anyone can read my articles on Blitz, which the website is www.weeklyblitz.net. I would like to say one thing about Blitz, Mark. It's a remarkable publication. It's based in South Asia, in Bangladesh, and I believe, Mark, that I'm the only Jewish person who has the role of international foreign editor for an Islamic publication. Now, the owner and publisher of Blitz, a remarkable man called Saladin Chowdhury, spent 7 years in a Bangladeshi prison just because he mooted the prospect of Bangladesh having some kind of relationship with Israel. That was his crime. 7 years in a hellhole of a Bangladeshi prison. He's out. He still allows me to publish pro-Israel articles. He gets threatened regularly with death threats. The new administration in Bangladesh, which is a virulently extreme Muslim government, has overthrown the more moderate government of Sheikh Hasina, and his life is in constant danger. And yet he continues to publish articles from me that are pro-Israel. The reason I write for this magazine, Mark, is because there are numerous pro-Israeli activists like myself that preach to the converted. You can find their brilliant articles in magazines like Gatestone and Decisive Liberty, and over here, The Conservative Woman, etc. But I felt that I needed to get out to an audience which was very hostile to the Jewish people and the Jewish state of Israel. And my articles are published in English, Arabic, and in Urdu. And I think the reach is something like 2 million plus, but not normally a demographic that someone like myself would write to. But I feel that I need to get out to an audience that is hostile to get some kind of dialogue going. And despite the fact that I, like my publisher, is constantly threatened, I feel that I'm winning some voices over. So that's the reason that I write for an Islamic publication.
Well, I highly commend you for doing that, my friend. And in fact, there's a very, I just talked about the American Gulag Chronicles book, which is on on the shelf behind me, in regard to people on January 6, 2021, exercise their constitutional rights, and then the FBI, etc., being used to come against them. In lawfare, in appalling situation, and then it speaks of Alexander Solzhenitsyn. It speaks of Gulag Archipelago, which speaks of history. So free speech, which, as you know, free speech is deeply protected in America by the First Amendment. Within our own situation, that is beginning to be highly, highly questionable. And I'm just going to throw this in. Um, Peter, and that's why I'm grateful for what you're doing. And we are very conscious that on Veterans Day, on Remembrance Sunday, that Allison Pearson, reporter, then had a knock on the door by two members of Essex Police to complain about a tweet that she gave a year ago, and the fact that they won't reveal who has made the complaint, etc., and they then view this person as a victim. The reason why I'm saying it is because Alison also has been vociferous about her support of Israel and condemning the attacks that Hamas did on October the 7th, etc. So here we are when Allison Pearson, who writes in the Telegraph, has Planet Normal as a podcast, and it isn't because I'm doing her marketing. There is an important point I wish to make, which is dialogue, trying to educate people is profoundly important, and that's why you do what you do. And from my own position, my own faith, I know that we are in a huge spiritual battle between good and evil, and that is what I believe that we are seeing unfold. Peter, after that, sorry, I do apologize on the one level, but I just feel it's just really important to say this. And thank you for writing to educate people that would not be listening normally, maybe to what we're saying, etc., and they need to. Peter, what direction do you want to take it? Do you wish to report on make comments on some of the events that we've seen in Europe? Of course, we've just seen Donald J. Trump win the presidential election last week to become the 47th, but he's now president-elect. Yes, inaugurated on January the 20th. So you take it wherever you want to take it.
Yeah, I think let's work backwards. I think the Allison Pearson event is a very, very important issue and exposes the state of where we are in the United Kingdom at the moment. Now, remember, this was Remembrance Sunday when 2 or 3 policemen knocked on her door about something of such insignificance on a day when it was well mooted, Mark, that perhaps there could be trouble at various Remembrance Sunday events because of the opposition to the Judeo-Christian values that we hold so dear in this country. And yet Essex Police found the time and effort to devote 2 or 3 policemen to knock on the door of this journalist on a day when surely they could have employed their resources so much more effectively. Now, I know that since that time, Essex Police have come in for huge amounts of criticism, and I understand the guy who is in charge of Essex Police is making statements in order to justify what he did, but he's trying to justify the unjustifiable. I think he's been quite rightly criticised and mocked, and we have other news channels now that can challenge the BBC and Sky and ITV and Channel 4. We have Talk TV, we have GB News, and they quite rightly are not letting this go. I think the Chief Constable is in a position where he should be forced to resign in rather the same way that the Archbishop of Canterbury was forced to resign. He tried everything he could to stay into power, and eventually he was forced to. I'm hoping the same thing's going to happen to the Chief Constable, and other constabularies up and down the country will not mimic what this clown has done. But it goes further than that, Mark, because clearly there is an agenda here to cut down not only free speech, but free speech coming from a certain sector which the far left opposes, and that is the centre right or the right. So there's something more sinister going on here, Mark. And I'm hoping that the Allison Pearson case will be the case that actually defines where this country is going. So that's that out the way. Now let's go back to what's happened with the president election. Everyone who had been following the presidential election can have been no doubt that the mainstream media were just pursuing one story about how far it was in the polls. It was neck and neck. It could go any which way. And all they were doing was basing their information on polls which historically were left-leaning. Of that, there's no doubt. No, I have no problem with that. But it just shows you how professionally incompetent and intellectually imbecilic, in my opinion, the main perpetrators of such news are. Now, I was following another, as well as following the polls, I was following something else, Mark. I was, having been in the financial markets all my life, I was following the betting markets and what they call the call and put options markets. For some of your viewers who don't understand this, I'll go into that second case in a minute. But the betting markets, for months, had Donald Trump as what we would call an odds-on favourite, by far. And yet, none of the mainstream media paid any concentration at all to what the betting markets were doing. In my world, that meant that a Donald Trump victory was overwhelming, which it proved to be. And yet, no mainstream media commentator was following the betting markets. There was another market that would indicate that Mr. Trump would have been a victor, and that was what we call the options market. And I'll very briefly go through this, Mark. In the world of financial derivatives, there are products called call and put options. The call option would be taking a view on what would happen 3 or 6 months down the road. And that market, following the betting markets, overwhelmingly endorsed a Trump victory. In other words, those people were betting that the stock markets and the financial markets would rally on a Trump victory. And that's what happened. Again, no one in mainstream media paid any attention to that particular market. Only the polls, which again, I was skewed towards the left. And do you remember, Mark, how much coverage was given to one poll just a couple of days before the market?
Iowa poll. The Iowa poll,
which said this was going to be that Trump was down by 3 points and etc., etc. How wrong that pollster was, and yet mainstream media gave saturation coverage to that one poll in that one state, which again should prove to the silent majority, Mark, how skewed mainstream media is. Absolutely. And that goes back to the Allison Pearson case about their agenda. So, that being the case, we move forward, and President Trump in January will become the president of the United States by an overwhelming majority, and the left are in meltdown about this. But again, it comes as no surprise to someone like me and yourself. I think there were bigger forces at play here, not just the one man, one vote force, but I think this was something that was, let's say, spiritually created. And I'm hoping that what situation with President Trump, despite all the human forces against him, will replicate itself in other countries as well. So naturally, I'm delighted that President Trump has been elected, and we can already see from the people he is gathering around him, the kind of administration this will be. The promotion of ex-Senator Mike Huckabee to be the US ambassador to Israel, to me, says it all. An evangelical Christian who believes in the word of God and the word of the Bible, who believes in the state of Israel being the geographical area promised to the Jewish people, etc. And with other similar type candidates in the administration, this bodes well for the future. Unfortunately, what we're seeing in Europe is paints a very unhealthy, unattractive picture, whereby Jewish populations, irrespective of whether they support the government of the state of Israel, irrespective that those Jews may or may not be pro-Palestinians, are just being exposed for being members of the Jewish faith. And it makes no difference to my fellow Jews who are anti-Jewish state, anti-Netanyahu, anti-Zionist. Matey, you are a Jew, and the population that is marching in the streets every Saturday against Israel and Zionism have you in mind as well. They will make no distinction between whether you're a Netanyahu supporter or not. You are a Jew, mate, and they will come for you.
Thank you for your excellent roundup there, Peter. I fully agree. I fully agree with you. And we've just witnessed some appalling events that happened in Amsterdam as the Tel Aviv Maccabees football team was playing Ajax. And we have seen the reaction from the BBC, let's call it out, describing this situation as clashes between the Israeli football team and between Ajax, not talking about as it's been exposed, the planned attack on Jewish supporters of their football team, of the Israeli football team. And then the reaction and the unfolding of that, and those events, it looks like then we've seen the events that have happened in Sweden after that, of people saying, in referring to Amsterdam, going up, "Are you Jewish?" Beating people, people having to jump into canals for their own safety, cars being rammed. It looks like taxi drivers in collusion to the whole thing, to get Jewish people, Jews then fleeing to their hotels, etc., etc. And I will say this, Peter, and it's not being reported about, but I saw this, which was then Christians coming to their aid in their own private cars, etc., etc. And I would just add a caveat to this, that this reporting of these events in the mainstream news has been, at times just denying various things. It has not been factually telling the truth. But I just wonder, I've been very, very disturbed by seeing all that, because we are discussing Anne Frank country. We're discussing that whole thing, and reminding us of that in history, and that's 80 years ago. And that is within certain people's lifetime. It's coming to the end, but that is in certain people's lifetime. I just wonder if you want to make some comments on that.
There's a couple of things here, Mark. And again, we're going to have to go back a couple of years, maybe even longer. You would have seen from the recent numbers of boat people coming into this country that the vast majority of those immigrants are men between the ages of 18 and, let's say, 60. The vast majority. Very rarely do we see a boat coming in where the numbers are women and children. The vast majority of men. Europe has been flooded. It's not only the United Kingdom, but Europe has been flooded with a similar demographic. The age group, 18 to 60, 90% plus men, mainly Muslims who have been indoctrinated with an education system that is certainly rabidly anti-Semitic, but also anti-West, and with an agenda to Islamize Europe. Now, when I state that on social media, as many people do, we are immediately branded as right-wing, fascist, racist, xenophobic, anti-Islamic, etc., etc. And we are shouted down. And media, the left-wing media, shouts us down. What's happened in the last, let's say, 5 to 10 years is the number of that demographic has been growing. They've been emboldened. They've been encouraged and facilitated by our media. And people like myself, and as we've seen very recently, the Allison Pearsons of this world, are targeted for stating what should be patently obvious and factual, but we are challenged by the opposition to going back into our shell because we're too frightened in case we're labelled racist and with the police knocking at our door. I fear that with this new Labour government, that's going to embolden further those to whom I challenge and expose. And that will make people like myself more frightened to challenge the obvious. I fear not only for the safety of Jewish people in this country, because let's face it, Mark, history tells us that whether it's Nazism or extreme Islamism, Jews are the first target. But I also fear, Mark, for the Judeo-Christian values. I read, I think it was just yesterday, that a school in Surrey is no longer promoting the Christmas festival for fear of upsetting minority groups. This is the country that we're living in. There's another interesting statistic, Mark. In the House of Commons, those Muslim MPs and their supporters, like the Jeremy Corbyn Independent Group, as a multiple, speak 73 times more about the Israel-Palestinian issue, and obviously being pro-Palestinian, anti-Israeli, than they do about the NHS. Just imagine that as a statistic. Now, this is where we are as a country. The only way I can see this country breaking that mould is if the Conservative Party and the Reform Party band together. If they don't, then that will let in the Labour Party and their supporters. And I fear the only way that common sense can prevail will be some kind of connectivity between those on the centre right and right, which are the Conservative and the Reform Party. If they don't, Mark, and there's no, with Kemi Badenoch just being elected as the leader of the Conservative Party, I can't, and her making certain statements that she wants to win back the Conservative vote. I don't see that happening. I think that vote will still be split. So at the moment in this country, and again, similarly in Europe, especially in France, I don't see a way forward that is going to make the lives of Jewish people in Europe more pleasant, let's say. I think that's on a downward trajectory, irrespective of what happens with the Israel-Palestinian issue. It's very sad, and frankly, I'm frightened. And if I were a younger man, I would certainly, the way things are, be looking elsewhere other than the UK to live, where my great-grandparents came over in the mid 19th century. Very sad. I see a
I'm
few. Sorry, I see a few politicians fighting our cause, but I think that they are overwhelmed. Overwhelmed.
I am deeply saddened to hear you say what you've done in your last few sentences, and it reminded me, and I would just say this because I have forwarded it to you, which is the podcast done by the brilliant Andrew Gold, which is Heretics. And Andrew has just done a nearly 8-minute piece where he's British Jewish, but he said, I'm applying for a passport to another country just in case, as Andrew says, because he's fully aware historically and makes reference to the Jewish people that stayed within Germany and did not leave. That I watched that has shaken me to the core. We saw certain things coming, but on the other hand, we still can't quite believe that there are the kind of issues that are going on within our own country. And I take your words of what you've said very, 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 very seriously, and it upsets me. Now, I agree with you. When I have seen a certain individual stand up in Parliament going, will the Prime Minister condemn Israel for genocide? Well, we need the incredible Natasha Horsoff with us, who completely and utterly smashes that whole argument to pieces, which is not true. And because the enemy is using the words that, genocide them, as we say, then they go to Holocaust, which are the words to then ignite Jewish history, Jewish sentiment in regard to the Second World War, and it's all deliberate. And as you know, words are extremely powerful in the way they put that there. I hear what you're saying in regard to conservative and reform. I'm afraid Badenoch to me is a Michael Gove protege. Michael Gove has a heck of a lot to answer for, and I'm just going to bring this up. This is a very interesting book, which Gove also contributed to, which is a Blue Tomorrow, which basically is discovering the fact that we have a Conservative Party since Cameron where they're all it's just all full of wets and Liberal Democrats. And since Keir Starmer and co came into power on the 4th of July, I think last week's figures, we are up to 34,500 illegal immigrants coming over the channel by dinghy. We are able to quote facts, even if they will not tell us the makeup of people that are committing crimes in this country, etc. And Peter, to quickly go back to the comments you made about dear Allison Pearsons and the Essex police, the number one thing that the Essex police and other police forces in this country need to ask themselves is, are they tackling burglary? Are they tackling other crime that they need to be tackling? Because some of the crime rates are off the charts, but also actually bringing the perpetrators to justice, they're not doing very well in so many different facets and so many different crimes. And the non-hate crime, which we have to point out, was brought in under the cap by David Cameron in 2014. And according to Toby Young and the Free Speech Union, we are up to something like 65 of these, I think, maybe a month, maybe even a week. And at the moment, there'll be something like 265,000 of these recorded when they were accelerated. And also, let's just remind ourselves that Suala Benjamin, the previous Home Secretary under the previous Conservative government, asked for these to be dropped, asked for these to be stopped. So we need to throw that out. And this to me is like the Stasi. I made a film in 2018 period called The Iris Echo, which is a warning about communism. I didn't mean it to be prophetic, and this isn't just a shameless plug. We use our art to give a warning, and I do feel that this is where we are. This is where we are at, my friend Peter. I'm conscious of your time in the last sort of 5-10 minutes of our discussion. What are your thoughts, and where do you want to take our discussion now?
Right, a couple of things, Mark. When you are as actively involved in research as I am, there are a couple of things that are staggering. I just want to throw out some thoughts to you and your audience. As you know, we have had in the UK two regular political programs, one on TV called Question Time and one on the radio called Any Questions, going since the mid-90s and before, run at their heyday by the Dimbleby brothers, as you know, the sons of the great broadcaster Richard Dimbleby, who went into the concentration camps in the Second World War and reported on them.
Yeah.
Now, this is a staggering statistic. During the last 30 years that those two programs have been running, there has never ever been a question centered on a country in Africa, the 11th largest country in the world, called the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. As we speak now, in that 30-year period or so, over 6.5 million indigenous Black Africans have been slaughtered in a genocide. I bet you, Mark, not one of our listeners now would know, I didn't know until I looked it up, the name of the president or prime minister or even the capital of that country. But 6.5 million people have been slaughtered during 30 years in a genocide, 11 million displaced, and the BBC hasn't even on their mainstream political programs ever devoted one question to that. If you look at the BBC website, unless you go onto the BBC Africa page, you might see a little article about the DRC. We've ignored also in this country the 600,000 Syrians slaughtered by President Assad. We've ignored the 250,000 Yemenis slaughtered by the Houthis. We've ignored the genocide being undertaken on Christians in Africa, certainly in Nigeria. We ignore so many things in mainstream media, but we give saturation coverage to that one tiny country, no bigger than Wales. This was prior to October the 7th, Mark, believe me. The saturation coverage given to Israel. Do you know, Mark, I was banned from complaining to the BBC because I pointed out to them that they ran an article every day for 9 months about a Palestinian girl being jailed for slapping an Israeli soldier. I pointed out that this was overkill, and I was banned from complaining to the BBC about that. So until we get our mainstream media aligned to what is actually happening in the world, then maybe we might even get the United Nations aligned to what's happening in the world. But so much of our thought processes are determined by what our mainstream media impose upon us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Absolutely.
That we are not going to be able to move on from here. And unfortunately, those individuals responsible for the output of the United Kingdom, we're not going to get anywhere. So something dramatically needs to happen. Fortunately, from what I gather, Mark, that small news broadcaster, GB News, is making huge inroads. Their viewing statistics on a rapidly upward trajectory, and those at the BBC and Sky are on a downward trajectory. But that doesn't mean that GB News is taking over, because there are other independent media sources, especially for the kids today, who are going more on social media and things like TikTok and Instagram, that they're getting their news, and they can be as damaging as the legacy media. But I fear that we have been indoctrinated by the BBC and other mainstream media outlets into believing Israel, Jews, Zionism bad, Christianity bad, Islam, mosques, good, immigrants, good. And I'm afraid that's not the case. We are suffering as a country from not being sufficiently robust in our challenge to the kind of demographic that we are allowing into our country. We've also been indoctrinated into believing that those heading up our institutions, such as the police, our local councils, our schools, academia, are of a certain ideological agenda which goes directly against the Judeo-Christian values that I was brought up to believe and that many of my generation will be brought up to believe. How we change that? Well, we've seen what's happened with the election of President Trump. That was certainly the silent majority speaking out, but also, Mark, it was a greater force in my belief. And I'm hoping that the same thing will happen in the United Kingdom and Europe going forward.
And as Allison Pearson also has talked about, and others, the silent majority mustn't be the silent majority anymore. And we have to speak out. We have to be very clever in how we do that and use every single opportunity to do that. And of course, and I'm only going to make this statement, with the events that happened in Southport, and you and I are not condoning the violence, but the suspicions that people had, those suspicions have proved to be right. And now what we now have within the Houses of Parliament is that Lindsay Hoyle, as a Speaker, has banned members of Parliament from talking about that. The individual involved, who's now 18, this supposedly is going to trial in next January. We have seen people, I believe we now have our own political prisoners. I'm not condoning some of the things that people have written. They have then written that or brought them down, taken them down. What I am saying is that people have to understand some of that frustration of when members of Parliament are not doing anything. And it's rather interesting, isn't it, that they are very swift to do that and put various people in jail, like Lucy Connolly, for argument's sake. And sadly, we then have the appalling death of Peter Lynch. But they still have yet to charge these two young men in regard to Manchester breaking a female policeman's nose, etc., etc. They have still got to charge those two people who then attacked our police in that situation. We haven't heard anything from the Crown prosecutions yet. I am not saying any of this, Peter, to be controversial, because we will stick to the facts, because we'd like to think that everyone is equal under the law, that justice is blind. That's why you've got the blindfold on, e.g. in how it treats everyone equally. And you and I both know that we are not seeing that at the moment, and that is a deep concern to us. And we have to talk honestly about this situation, because, and I can't remember fully the poem, the comments, but it's like saying, first they came for the Jews, then they come for the communists, then they come for me, or whatever order you want to say it. And there was no one to defend me. This is the whole point. George Orwell, as someone said, 1984 needs to go back to being an interesting book to read instead of a manual that is folding out in front of our eyes. Peter, we're in the last couple of minutes. I just want to leave you with the last couple of minutes to say whatever you wish to say. But also, again, I want to just say before that is to say thank you for joining me. But Peter, what would your last comments be?
Yeah, I'm going to make one prediction, Mark, going forward, and it will be interesting to see what happens next time I'm invited onto your program. We will see in the next few months various atrocities being undertaken in this country by those of the demographic that I've just described. I assure you, Mark, the media will do everything in their power to underplay those atrocities, and also will expose those who committed them, not by their religion, race, or ideology, but almost certainly will accuse them of having some mental health issues. I'm sure we can see the way it's going, and again, that shows you where we are currently in this country. And with that, Mark, I'm afraid I'm going to have to love you and leave you, as they say, and thank you so much for having me on your program again.
Not at all. I'm going to play us out. I'll quickly say goodbye to you on the other side as we download. But anyway, everyone, please, we need to be praying about all that's going on. Peter, thank you so much indeed.
Thank you,
See you
Mark.
soon. Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye.
Bye.